Launched Hike, it became number 1 in Germany in 24 hours and number 2 in Saudi in 48 hours. And I swear to God, I'm telling you, maybe I've not spoken about this publicly. I just remember walking into the office one day saying, I don't want to be here.
And to be at a point where everybody is, talking about you, you've raised significant amounts of capital, team is thriving, and now you have to just take a different decision.
Growing the business is now about survival. When your backs are pushed up against the wall, you need to make some big decisions. Building a company is one of those things that's the best thing to pick up if you really want to grow 360 in a record amount of time. I'm a product-obsessed founder, and that's a really good thing up until a certain point. A lot of people play games. I think 500 million games in the country that do like an hour gaming their phones every day. It's actually my favorite question, so thank you for asking.
Welcome to the Indian Silicon Valley podcast. I'm your host, Jivraj, and I'm really glad to share that we're now part of the Zerodha Media Network. For today's episode, I have with me a very special guest, a person I've been meaning to chat with for a really long time and somebody who exemplifies the founder mindset really, really well. Join me in welcoming Kavin Bharti Mittal, who's the founder and CEO of Hike. Thank you so much, Kavin, for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited, as I mentioned, because in my observation and leading up to the episode, what I was really impressed by was the founder zeal that you've been able to exhibit. And we've all, like at least my generation, we've seen the Hike app. We've used it at some point or the other. We've seen media glorify, and you as a company have seen the highest of highs and then some lows. And then now there's something more happening. So I'm really excited to uncover all of those learnings across the last 10, 12 years that you've been building Hike. And also, more importantly, as I was telling a friend who's also helped us organize this, that I want to uncover the founder aspect of things. Where I want to start is one of the core insights that I observed from your journey was that you got to witness these historic tech movements, right? Or moments where you saw the iPhone wave, you saw the App Store wave, you capitalized on it, started building apps on the Apple Store. That was the first wave. Then you saw the mobile wave in India. That's when you started building Hike. You've now seen the Web3 wave. You've now seen the ChatGPT moment as well. Talk to us about what these moments have meant for you. How have you been able to capitalize it and what that means as a founder? And then maybe we'll get going into deeper aspects.
That's a great start. So, for me, I was always a tinkerer most of my life. Yeah. And at some point in time, I learned how to code myself, and I was not very good at it. But you sort of figure out and you start building things. And as a shy, introverted kid, when you have coding at your sort of in one of your capabilities, you can just get busy and build stuff. Yeah. And I remember the Facebook platform launching when I was 18, 19, maybe 20, and that was not much of a platform, but you could build apps on it and do fun things. And around the same time, the iPhone launched. This is 2007, and I remember sort of, going to Google in Mountain View to intern at sort of, as a summer intern at the campus there. And along the way, I stopped off in New York to meet some family, and I picked up an iPhone. I had to queue in it for like an hour and a half, 2 hours, and got the iPhone. And, it was not very functional. It didn't have 3G, only 2G, but that multi-touch interface was magical. I mean, as a 19-year-old kid obsessed with design and code, I was just pinching and zooming, 20 times a day. And so I remember walking into Google, and they'd partnered with like Apple at that time to build the YouTube app on the phone. Mm-hmm. And internally inside of Google, they had like jailbroken the iPhone, some pockets of it. They were building apps. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. But, I don't know much. And I said, fine, great. Maybe the opportunity will come sort of 6 months, 1 year down the line. And lo and behold, the next year, Apple launched iPhone 3G with 3G, and they launched the App Store. And I was like, okay, how do we get on this? How do we build for this platform? And Apple makes things very easy. So all we had to do was pay $100, get the SDK. And I called up one of my friends who was studying the same university as me and said, listen, let's go build some things for like this device. And we were very naive. We thought we'll build one idea a month, and over 8 months we'll build 8 ideas. And it took us 8 months to build one idea we were obsessed about, which was this movie ticketing application that we had, thought to sort of build, which got success fairly, quickly. We got to like a couple of 100,000 users who were using the application, and we had done this in like our free time as a thing we were obsessed with. And it was quite the project. It had, mobile payments built in, bitrate sort of trailer streaming, and so on and so forth. I designed the app personally myself with the help of 1 or 2 people. That's when I realized I was much more obsessed with pixels and design than code. And I was much better at that, and something I loved doing, in a big way. And we launched the app, and launching the app and getting those first 1,000 people to give you feedback shifted something in my mind. And I realized, wow, like we just had an idea 8-9 months ago and we launched it as two 19, 20-year-olds, didn't have to ask for permission. No need for big funding. And you launched it and you can get feedback from the world. And there's a lot of people that loved it and said, oh my God, this is great. It's changed my life. I mean, it's a movie ticketing application, right? And some people are like, no, this sucks and this is not working. And so, getting exposed to that positive and negative feedback loop early on in life, it changed my life. And I was also very disinterested in like most things in the world. And when I found this, I was like, oh my God, I'm good at this and I want to build for the rest of my life. That shifted something in a very, very big way inside of me. So saw the early, smartphone sort of moment. And then, I was in university at this time and my second or third year. Then I finished my university reluctantly, because I was doing electrical engineering, which is very hardcore, especially in the UK course, which is very different from a practical sort of way of approaching life. Finished my master's, and then I was observing what was happening in India. And it became very clear to me that what's happening in the US and UK will eventually make its way to India. And I remember coming back from the UK, spending some time here, and I was in Connaught Place in Delhi, and there's a nice, line of chaatwalas and golgappa walas in, CP, which is where you hang out as, a young person. And I was with some friends, and I remember bringing back an iPhone with me. It was my main phone. And I had 2G, but like there was maps, there was email, like it was game changing. And I was ordering some street food, and on the other side, there was this guy serving us who had a Nokia 1100 phone.
With a keypad.
With a keypad and the torchlight. That was the trucker phone that was very popular. Sold tens of millions in India. And I was like, wow, like how would these guys come online? And, data was expensive back then. Data was 2G. People were buying data in sachets. And I was like, this is not how, this go-to-market's not going to work. So could we like simplify the go-to-market for the internet? Could we sort of use messaging, which is the simplest thing people understood, communication as a way to bring India online? This is the first big vision that we had. Fast forward 4, 5, 6 years, we built Hike Messenger to 40 million customers, raised a lot of capital, built a super app, gateway highway with messaging, news, content, payments, gaming, all that stuff. And, that company, that product grew very fast. Much faster than all of us anticipated. And that was the first big, thing that I'd built. And again, though, all my product development jobs that I built early on in building those apps became so useful here. The first version was designed by myself and so on and so forth. And, that sort of was a fantastic 4.5, 5 years. And then the market completely changed. Sort of all the constraints we were building for suddenly vanished overnight. 2G became 4G, data became cheap, smartphones became very, very good at very low prices. And suddenly downloading apps is very easy, getting content was very easy. In a world where data is so cheap and the smartphone is also so good at low prices, the smartphone becomes a super app. And, that was a big moment for us because, 2016, we were flying high. We had raised this capital, growing, expanding product lines. And 1 year after that, we're like, oh, shit. So, something is not right.
Can we maybe take a pause and understand when you start to build Hike and, something like messaging in a world where WhatsApp also existed and, the common narrative among startups being that social is perhaps the toughest category to crack just because, there's so many things. I would love to understand if you had did you think about the constraints at the time that, these are the not so probable things about social, or was it just natural instinct to say that, hey, this is a problem that somebody will solve for. Let's go ahead and do that. I want to understand the trade-offs you were making at the time and what was the left brain decision of saying that, we can still do this. The execution, of course, played out well, and then there were external factors. We'll come to that. But what was the in-the-moment decision-making factor to say that, we'll spend time doing this despite the constraints of network effects, social, people paying, we don't know, like so many unknowns?
Great question. The answer is I was 24. I was naive, I was foolish, and I had this idea that I knew if we executed really well, it could have a big impact. And there's value in being naive and foolish. And, we were not thinking about network effects. It's that we had to think about them afterwards. And it became very clear to me that early on, fortunately, because I had met a couple of people who were investors in Facebook and so on and so forth, that social companies are the unique monster.
Yeah.
In the sense that those companies can delay the business model by 4 or 5 years to build the network and scale.
Yeah.
And so we did the same thing. And this is true of Facebook or Twitter, Instagram, WhatsApp. In WhatsApp today, I don't know if they make money or not, but all social networks are built very, very differently.
Yep.
And they're the only sort of companies today in the top, let's say 500 companies by market cap in the world that were built very differently, including Snapchat. So I think that was not the thinking. The thinking was, can we build something fantastic? Can we get the product market fit?
Yeah.
And the first version of Hike also had something called Hike to SMS, which had bridged the gap between SMS and like IP messaging. And that took off in a very big way.
Yeah.
And then we launched our, famous stickers and local languages and so on and so forth. And then a bunch of other stuff. But, we were not as, let's say, thoughtful about all these things.
And does that help? Does that mindset of not complicating as a founder help so that you don't get ahead of yourself? Because if you think about all the constraints, and my fear in life now is that, with all this overload of information, knowledge, there's always negatives I can point out to a particular space. What do you think about that?
It's very, very important not to go into like a thinking maze. You got to think. It's very, very important. But at some point, you got to say, you know what? Like, you have 70% information. In my product development philosophy, like has always been, and more so now, like fire bullets, then go fire a bazooka. And in the world of bits, by the way, in code, because launching something is relatively very low cost versus atoms. If you're standing up real estate, the cost, you got to, sink a lot of money in early on. In the online world, you can fire bullets and see if some bullets hit a target.
Yeah.
And if they hit a target once or twice, you can take the bazooka out and go fire a bazooka. So early on when we launched Hike Messenger, we didn't know it was going to work. Right? We had a hypothesis. And we were just obsessed in figuring out what to make work. And the funny thing is when we launched Hike, by the way, it became number 1 in Germany in 24 hours and number 2 in Saudi in 48 hours.
Oh, wow.
And we had no clue. And then we realized, it's because we have 128-bit SSL encryption on messaging. This is why the Germans and the Middle East lost. So we actually had like 500,000 customers using us across the globe. And so we were building for India. So sometimes what happens is the market and product market gets discovered.
Yeah.
And in a bit-space business, you can do it because it's a lot low cost to go launch certain things.
Yeah. No, that's pretty cool. I think very fascinating to hear. As you were sharing, right? Like if you can also maybe help us put things into perspective. How fast was that? Fast really? I mean, I researched some numbers. You reached 100 million, the fastest perhaps at that time. Nobody had seen that scale in the country when it came to, maybe monthly active users. What was that journey like? What was that high of the mountain like? Just tell us your view and maybe we'll then understand what happened and like how things unfolded post that.
Yeah, of course. So I still remember launching the first version. We got this traction in Germany and Middle East. And we had partnered with Twilio back then, and Twilio was wildly expensive because they had to send the OTPs for, integration. And I remember like we had some small balance sitting in the Twilio account, which got finished very, very fast. And suddenly OTPs in Germany and Middle East stopped working. We had to make a decision as to where do we focus, And so we focused all our efforts in India and we launched all these products. And early on, we realized, we need the network, right? If your friend's not on this platform, you're not going to use it. This is pretty early. I think WhatsApp just about to launch a year and a half ago and so on and so forth. So then we said, we got to find a way to sort of solve for distribution. And I think this is the best thing that happened to us and me, which is a lot of product-obsessed founders don't think about distribution. And a network-based product, we were forced to think about distribution really early on. So we had this crazy idea, which was, what if, because data was very expensive back then, what if we incentivize people to invite their friends and we give them like free talk time or free data? And we had partnered with this little company called PTM back then and actually built a lot of their technology stack to sort of make this possible. And we launched it, and the first version of this referral program was designed like very poorly in hindsight. You invited a friend successfully when they joined, you got that talk time, and then you could just leave the platform.
Okay.
So we went from like nothing to like 5 million registered users in like 48 hours.
Wow.
But the active count was very, very low, and also it crashed our entire system because our messaging system was not ready for scale.
Yeah.
And we said, oh my God, that was such a stupid mistake. And we backtracked, pulled all this stuff back, and for like 9 months, heads down, we had now about 500,000 daily active users that are using the platform. Barely, breaking every day, second day, so on and so forth. Then we went back and launched the second referral program, which was tied to engagement in the platform. And that didn't get like massive, explosive growth, but we could see that it was getting the right kind of growth. And suddenly in year 2, year 3, we had like a couple of, I think 1 million daily active users. And then it was growing organically. And then suddenly we were getting about 50K downloads per day automatically. People are signing up. Their retention was off the charts. And the key curve for the platform was what we call recurring 30-day daily active users, which is only in a social product.
Yeah.
How many people use your product back to back on a 30-day basis?
Wow.
And the curves were like this.
The 2G
and
curves.
we're like, oh, wow, we have product market fit. And then we kept building, launching, innovating. We launched stickers. We launched the timeline, the social feed, a bunch of other stuff. And we made all the right decisions, and the platform was growing very, very fast. We got to a point where we said, okay, now we need to expand the reach. And I was very against like doing things like media ads. We realized in India back then, the internet penetration was so low. The only way you'd reach people was sort of, do some TV ads. Massive TV campaign, behind the scenes, a very big referral program. And we used this playbook like twice to grow the platform to like, 15 million daily actives and 40 million monthly actives. And along the way, we could finally make the vision come to life. We could finally launch the platform piece of it, the news, the gaming, the payments, and so on and so forth. And then suddenly, Hike became a super app.
Yeah.
And so, along the way, we brought Tiger on board, we brought Tencent on board, Foxconn on board. We actually had hardware ambitions. We launched our own operating system in 2016, 2017. Because of the constraints of the internet and so on. But since the market changed after that, we had to roll back all of those plans. And we built the team from launch to 450 people in a matter of 4.5, 5 years, 2 offices. And, I was 28, 29, 30 maybe, when at the peak of sort of Hike Messenger. And it was quite the journey. We grew very, very fast, but we were obsessed. And the average age of the company was, I think, 25, 26. So we had a bunch of people that were just obsessed and trying to figure things out. And that attitude worked extremely well for us. And I learned a lot from that.
And that's fascinating. I think that's a tremendous journey. What I love to understand is, right, I think what I was trying to understand from my research is perhaps you couldn't have foreseen the fact that, hey, data will become this cheap. That brings me to the point that founders have to perhaps I'd love your thoughts on the reflection side of, okay, what are the unknowns that you can't predict in a journey? And how does that impact market timing for you as a product, right? Like so much of this, you could perhaps say that, okay, if you start building Hike post 2016, right, life would be different, right? Precisely. So I'd love to understand, what are these unknowns that you can't know as a founder, yet you have to make peace with the uncertainty, the ambiguity. What do you as a founder do in such moments? And forward looking, what do you now take care of, considering, let's say, what can you see 5 years into the future?
It's such a great question. I'll start with the second one first, right? So the biggest learning that I had from the first 5 years of building Hike was that we were building for the technology constraints of the time.
Not of the future.
And what happens is technology changes. And if you're building for the technology constraints of your time, sooner or later, you will get disrupted. So don't do that again. Number 2 is, a lot of people ask this question, what does the future look like? What's going to change? How should I position my company? And I think that's an interesting question. But the question that's a better question to ask is, what are the trends that are going to remain stable in time for the next 10 years? Because you can build a solid business on stable trends. You can't build it on changing trends. And so with Rush, do people want to play games, casual games on their phones? Will they want to in 10 years from now? Yeah. It's a pretty good sort of solid bet. Will people want to earn, 10 years from now? Absolutely. Will the payments infrastructure get worse in the next 10 years or get better? Will smartphones get better, faster, cheaper? Will data get better, faster, cheaper? Absolutely. These are stable trends for the next 10 years. You can build a solid business on. And these are big learnings, which is don't build for the technology constraints of today and find stable trends in time they can build a business on. And, answering the first part of your question, what I realized is that it's very normal for human beings to like have this need for like certainty. We have it across everything in our lives, not just business, but relationships and everything.
True.
And, certainty actually doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And once you realize that, and you realize everything is always in flux, that's how the world works. That's how people work. That's how nature works.
Yeah.
So if everything's always in flux and that's the absolute, how do you adjust yourself to work with things that are always in flux? And what, dawned upon me that there are always choices you can make, which means that at any given point in time, there are choices you can make, and you have multiple choices you can make, which means your life, your business, your career, your relationships can go down multiple different possibilities, paths of possibilities. It can go down this way, it can go down this way, this way.
Yeah.
The question is, which one do you take? And if you have some desire to succeed and get to a certain end goal, there are certain possibilities that will lead you down that path faster. The probability of success there is higher.
Yeah.
And then what happens is life becomes just a quest to figure out which possibilities have the highest probabilities of success. And that changes your mentality in a very, very big way. Yeah. And so, for example, when we were pivoting the business, we actually had 3 possibilities. We could have pivoted into a content, business. We had launched a bullet there. Yeah, fairly successful. We launched a bullet into meet new people, and we launched a bullet into gaming. And these are things we knew by the way. We were building all these things inside the super app. We've taken them out individually and we're building them separately. And the question was, okay, like, which is the path that has the highest probability of success? And we have these criterias. What are we excited about? If we're not obsessed about something, immediately the chance of success is a lot lower. Because the version of you that's excited is actually a different person, by the way, than the person you are now.
Yeah.
And I've seen it. When you're possessed and obsessed with something, there's no stopping you. It's a very different, DNA. And, what could we be obsessed with? What could we be the best at? Given time compounds all the things you do. And third was, where does the business model make the most sense? And now that we're not building a social app, that became very important.
Yeah.
And on the content side, we realized the business model is not going to make sense, right? The ad business model in India is still very, very early. Meet new people in India, there's no meet new people. There's no business model for meet new people. It's shadi, right? Yeah. Whereas in the US, like dating is a big thing. Plus, we were not the best people to build that product. And on the gaming side, we realized everything checked out. So we would put ourselves in a position where the probability of success was the highest amongst the 3.
Yeah. Can I play devil's advocate here and perhaps point out the paradox that in some of the business models which have won and gotten outlier success, you could argue that the probability of success was considerably lower, which meant that the risk was significantly higher. Yet the outlier success was high. I mean, maybe Airbnb is a good example, right? Who would have taken for the fact that at the time, you'd be allowing strangers to stay at vacant places in your home. And the probability of success, at least prima facie, was low. Is there a paradox that you have to decide there?
I think there's also like founder intuition that comes into play.
They believed in it.
Yeah. They saw something that nobody else did.
Yeah.
So in their mind, that possibility has a much higher probability of success than somebody else.
Fair.
And this is why your founder is building these unique companies. Yeah. They see something, that somebody else don't. So it's not this objective thing you'll do in a spreadsheet, because building a business doesn't start in a spreadsheet. Yeah. It starts with something in you has a gut or intuition. Yeah. And there's some data that you have, but mostly like walking into a business tends to be a judgment call. And that judgment is what investors back eventually.
Yeah.
So founders see something that others don't.
Yeah.
I think that's a very, very important part of market selection, people selection, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. And that's fascinating. I think that framework's really helpful, and I'm sure a lot of founders listening will benefit. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the fact that now that, everything changed and you're in this position of, having to pivot in technical terms. Now that it's in hindsight, I think it feels more structured, process oriented, right? I'd love to hear candid thoughts on what was it like in the moment, because to be at a point where everybody is, talking about you, you've raised some significant amounts of capital, team is thriving, and now you have to just take a different decision. And thankfully now you're on another great trajectory, and hopefully that is the way going forward as well. I'm sure everybody is wishing for the best. But what was it like in the moment? And we often hear these things, right? That you have to, like, as the CEO, perhaps maintain everything to be always going forward. You have to be positive. You have to be optimistic. But you're only human, right? We're as human as we are. So what was it like in the moment when you were taking those decisions?
It's such a good question. And you're also right. Hindsight, everything is clear and structured.
Yeah. This survivorship bias.
Yeah,
right?
100%. And also, like, you've had time to reflect and think and so on and so forth, right? Yeah. So in the moment, I still remember 2017, we were coming off this high and the market had shifted and we had to go take product risk. Hike Messenger was built very for like a 2G era. It was very photos and text. There was no videos on the platform, not video centric. And when the market opened up, we saw all the other social companies globally started launching in big ways in India. We said, we have to go take some product risk. We launched a bunch of things and they didn't work out, right? The way we sort of thought they would. And we ended up starting to see the metrics kind of tilt. The people who are using the super app were finding better avenues to sort of find their content and so on and so forth. On the social side, now with 4G, the world had changed. You could do videos and so on, and we're not sort of ready for that. So a lot of things actually happened. And we saw metrics start to tilt, and we tried to arrest the metrics. And I think we just accelerated the decline by taking product risk, which I think in hindsight was the exact right thing to do. Because otherwise you could have stayed stable and not grown for like 3-4 years. But it's in startups, momentum is everything.
Yeah.
Either you are growing or you are degrowing. Yeah. There's no middle.
The middle is the bad one.
The middle is the bad one because it gives you some false hope.
Yeah.
And so I remember that in 2017 and we had a problem.
Yeah.
And right now we had gone from like 150 people to 450 people in the last 9 months. We hired some of these executives and this, that, we're staying in the company. We're figuring out how to build the company as well while building the business too.
Yeah.
And we launched an operating system and we launched so many things and suddenly we had good chaos. The good chaos turned to bad chaos.
Yeah.
And bad chaos because one, the metrics were not suddenly in great shape because the market forces were changing and we were not, let's say, reacting as the best. Now in hindsight, we could have. And second is we'd hired like certain kind of people that in hindsight were the wrong fit for our company. These are people that were very good people who were professionals who were like great in like a big company setup. Then in a small company setup where you're going to take radical responsibility, where, it's, the buck stops with you, the DNA is very, very different. And a combination of our metrics sort of shifting and also, let's say, making some mistakes on the hiring side, like just created a recipe for like disaster. And I swear to God, I'm telling you, maybe I've not spoken about this publicly. I just remember walking into the office one day saying, I don't want to be here. And the culture had gotten to a point where like we were no longer like market focused. We were very internal focused, figuring our stuff out. And, we still had a lot of money in the bank, but right now we were burning a lot of capital. And I was like, I need to take a few days off because now in the middle of like numbers are declining, we have the wrong people in the company, in the middle of all this chaos and we're trying to figure out what to do. And, at this point, we're trying to salvage the product. 2017, 2018, 2019, we're trying to figure out what to do with this massive user base we had. Massive, 35, 40 million customers. And I remember thinking, you know what? I need to take a few days off to clear my head. And so, I didn't come to the office the next 3 days and I sat on my balcony, staring into the abyss, into the distance for 3 days.
Wow.
And I sat with myself and, when you sit with yourself, first the emotions are, playing up and then at the end of the first day, the emotions calm down.
Yeah.
And second day, the thinking is still there.
Can you talk us through some of them? Just like, what were the thoughts like? What were the words like?
Because as a young founder, when you're building a company and you're obsessed with it, a lot of your identity is wrapped up in your company, in your success and so on and so forth. Yeah. And when you're flying high, of course, things are easy. But when like suddenly the thing that you wrapped up your identity in is going the other direction, it's like, shit, like, what do you do?
Yeah.
And you get all these questions about, because your identity is wrapped up in something now that's not succeeding. Everything turns the other way. Yeah. And it's not a nice feeling, right? Because you're so identified with all these things. And so, I was sitting and thinking, first of all, like just sifting through my emotions. What are you feeling? Why are you feeling this? And there was probably a million gazillion things in my head, right? And sorry, it was the thoughts on day one. The thinking on day one is busy, very, very busy. The thinking settled down, then the emotions settled down on day two. And it was just me sitting with myself with no purpose, honestly. I just needed a break. And I didn't realize what I was doing was figuring out what was going inside my head. It was a very automatic subconscious thing. By the third day, everything quieted down. My mind quieted down, the emotions quieted down, and my mind was just blank. And I was like, okay, this is nice. And I could start finally asking some questions, which is, how did we get here?
Yeah.
And my nature is by default to take full responsibility for stuff. It's just the way I'm built. I take radical responsibility, right? And I think as a founder and CEO at that point, it was the most important thing was to take radical responsibility, which is, how did we get here? What are the choices we made, that I made to get us here, right? Fine, there are some market forces and so on and so forth, but like, could we have reacted to them better? How did we hire like some of these people who are probably good in a big company, but not good for us? I think every founder goes through a journey of hiring people who are very fantastic on paper, but like they don't fit sort of well in your company, and learned, that big lesson there and then. And most importantly, like, if this all goes to shit, what would you do? If you're not here building this company, because, in this very tough time, what would you do? And my answer was, I'd probably go build something else.
Yeah.
And I was like, wait, like, why would you not just do that in this company? You have everything.
Yeah.
There are things that need to be fixed, but you have everything. And I was like, oh shit, yeah.
That's true.
I can do that. Okay, so what do I need to like change to get to a place where like we can get back to like building again?
Yeah.
Because ultimately we are builders. That's what we do. And every time you stray away from that, it's not good. When you come back to that core, things are fantastic.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, this core product needs to be salvaged, but it doesn't need 450 people. We also don't need all these operating systems and this, that. We have to come back like to our core. And second is, I probably need a couple of years to figure things out. So you have to get the burn down and the runway extended to ensure we have the space to figure out what to do.
Yeah.
Third is, we can't have a team sitting far away from me. We had a Bangalore office of 200 people. It's just not going to work. And the culture there was actually different than Delhi. It just happens as you scale a company. And, there were some great people there, but different culture. And if you did all these things, then what? What's the plan? And I was like, first we need to figure out whether we have something left to salvage. And, go deep in the data and figure out why people are doing what they're doing.
Sure.
And more importantly, figure out what is the new market look like? Because suddenly all the assumptions we were building for were completely gone. Suddenly there was 4G, 100 million people using 4G.
Yeah.
UPI had just come. Everything changed.
Yeah.
And so I went back to the office 2-3 days later, and I went to my core team and said, guys, we're going to make some changes, and here's what we need to do. And they were shocked. Like, no. I said, guys, listen, if you don't do this, years will pass, right? And we'll lose all this time. And time is the most scarce resource that we have. And so reluctantly had a discussion, agreed, and we got into execution literally on the Sunday. Started building the plan, this, that, so on and so forth. On the Monday, announced everything, got into execution. And while the core team was executing on this plan to sort of get the team down to like 120 people, reorient the product team and so on and so forth, my mind was on, okay, fine, like what do we need to do with this business? Where do we go? What do we have to launch? What experiments do we have to go try? And we still had a pretty big user base, like 30 million, but declining. And about 10 million daily active users who love the product, absolutely love the product. And what became very clear to me was that social networks business models are ad-based. And in India, it's very tough to do.
Yeah.
So as a social network, you can't build a business in India. It's tough. You take, for example, ShareChat has such a big task, uphill battle ahead of them because the ad business model is not very lucrative.
Yeah, and it's so tough to build. It requires such great talent, compute, money.
Absolutely.
Yet the revenue pools aren't as large.
The revenue pools are not as large, right? So, and I had that reality check.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, then what? And I was like, okay, the market's changed.
Okay.
We have all these assumptions we had that are no longer true. But, if you fast forward all these 4G, cheap data, smartphone trends 3-4 years down the line, what would the market look like? You have like a pretty large market that has a big desire for consumption, guzzling a lot of data with seamless payments. So in that world, like what are some ideas we can plant today that we're excited about, that we know of, that we could be the best at, and meet new content, we knew people, social and we knew game. And then we decided to plant 3-4 ideas. And, that was there's no playbook to pivot a company, and I looked for it. There was no playbook. And I read what I could get my hands on. I talked to people that I could, talk to and so on and so forth. And through that, I started building a mental map and a blueprint of how to navigate this pivot.
Sure.
And that's where I solidified this line. Let's go fire some bullets, then go fire a bazooka. Because also like capital was tight.
Yeah.
And like every bullet we were launching, we were burning down capital balance. And, the fear of running out of capital will sort some things out in your mind. It gets even more focused and so on and so forth. And so we launched those bullets. Long story short, we sort of, focused on gaming.
And that became
the big thing that we anchored around. And then, in 38 months from launch, Rush it's become pretty wildly successful.
Yeah.
The platform's doing over $600 million of gross revenue a year. The company was going to be profitable, by the way, in December last year, if it was not for the GST changes.
Yeah.
But now we're still on track to becoming profitable, June, July sort of next year. And we have effectively used all our strengths and the things we know to build this business. Because funnily enough, the Rush Gaming platform is a platform which is a PvP platform.
Yeah.
It's a network. We know how to build a network.
Yeah.
I think it's also why we've gotten success so fast with this platform, because we know how to build a network, how to orchestrate one. And so, going from that sitting in the balcony and staring into the abyss and figuring out what to do, to then realizing if your mind is clear, the hands will do fantastic work. And from that, I learned something very big, which is if the mind is clear, if your thinking is clear, everything else follows. And when I was 24, 25, I discovered Zen Buddhism out of the blue. And I learned about perspective, which is how you see the world is everything for you.
Yeah.
And you may see the world very differently from me. Like both of us have like these magnifying glasses in front of our eyes. Mine may be blue, yours will be red. And we look at the world very differently.
Very true.
So spending time on understanding what your perspective is and why is it that became a very large part of my routine. So on a weekly basis now, I sit for a couple of hours in silence every Sunday. And it came from this moment. It was not something that I learned from a guru, something. It came from me sitting in, my balcony and staring into the abyss. And I realized the value of solitude and silence even more after that. Spending time figuring out what is going on in your mind, because you're making all these choices that come from not just a conscious place, but also a subconscious place.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of founders don't spend enough time on this aspect of things.
Yeah.
And, before we sort of, the podcast, we spoke a little bit about, I think the biggest sort of, when you're building a fast growing company, and I've seen this, twice over now, every 6 months, your role is changing.
Yeah.
And, as a young founder, you're going to be possessed, you do things, and 6 months after, let's say you start, some phase of your journey, you think you're finally on top of it. You feel fantastic. And then the company grows and it says, wait, no, we need a different version of you.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are not able to do that.
Yeah. You let the momentum carry you as opposed to being proactive about it.
Yeah. And also what happens is if you're not ahead of your company, it can be disruptive.
Yeah.
And, and I was wondered, why do some founders not remain CEOs of their companies? And I had to ask this decision to myself after I'd raised that round from Tiger, which was, I think the CEO at 27 was difficult.
Yeah.
it was like going against the grain on all these things that naturally you would do. And so, in hindsight, looking back, I think the reason why a lot of founders are not able to make that journey, that switch to be the perpetual CEO and a very high quality CEO, is because, at least in my perspective, there is a innocent conclusion that they draw on their minds that may not be true. Which is, if you ask, these people, do you believe in yourself? Do you trust yourself? And if you're truly honest about that question, for a lot of people, this answer would be no. But the question is, why is it no? And it's because I believe that somewhere in their minds, they've drawn this innocent conclusion that I should know things that I don't yet know. I should know all these things, but I don't know. That's not possible. So as a result, how can I believe in myself? It's a very natural conclusion, right?
Yeah.
And what happens is people tell themselves stories about themselves. This is how our personalities can get constructed.
Yeah.
And then what happens is you get so identified to those stories. And when you're identified with those stories, you stop becoming objective. These things all change. Now the question is, how do you convert that no into a yes? And if you look, let's say, take politics as an example, and humor me for 2 seconds, but if a politician becomes a prime minister for the first time, what do they know?
Yeah.
But there is a belief in the ability to figure things out.
Yeah.
And what I realized was the way to convert that no to a yes is to change the story. Which is, it's not about knowing things you should be knowing. Because if you're punching at a high level every 6 months, you're a noob.
Yeah.
At the next level, what could you know?
Yeah.
You know nothing. But can you figure things out or not? Can you be a quick study? And it's your ability to figure things out that converts that no into a yes. And so a lot of people need to spend time building the ability to figure things out.
Yeah.
Less worried about what they know.
Yeah.
And we also live in a world where in your mind, who are you trying to impress? There's always somebody in your mind you're trying to impress. Is it your girlfriend? Is it your mom? Is it your dad? Is it your colleagues? Is it people who work in your company? And because you want to impress them, you think you should know everything. The question is, why do you have that in your mind? Go study it. Go understand it.
Yeah.
And once you understand it, you can shift it from, I actually don't know a lot of stuff, but I'll figure it out. And that I love that, by the way. And I love people like this because that mentality of "Mereko pata nahi hai, but we'll figure it out" is a humble version of confidence.
Yeah.
The other version of confidence is I know it all, whatever, right? And that is a very arrogant version of confidence. And the problem with that is it keeps you stuck where you are.
Yeah.
So we love hiring people who know everything, but let's go figure it out. And if you have this mentality, and by the way, your attitude is the one thing you can control.
Yes.
You can't control anything else.
Yeah.
If you can control your attitude and point it in this direction, let time do the rest. Because time is a compounding factor. It'll compound good habits and bad habits. This is a good habit to have. If you're on this journey and you're surrounded by people who also understand and appreciate this, you'll scale. You'll scale very, very fast.
That's lovely. I think a lot of really, really core learnings there. I think lots to think about. And I really appreciate you being as vulnerable as possibly one could be in sharing that story of, in the moment needing time off because you're only human, and then coming out in the positive and figuring things out. I actually took 2 things from that I want to really quickly double click on. One was, you mentioned that, when you ask yourself the question that if I weren't doing this, I would probably build again, right? Is that nature or is that nurture? And if it's nurture, how did you nurture that muscle? I'd love to understand that, because if it's intrinsic to say that, okay, there are some people who just naturally, let's say, not born, but naturally wanting to build always, right? So that's a muscle that they always have. Vis-a-vis saying that, okay, can you actually build it out?
Yeah.
That was one. And I'll come to the second after this, perhaps.
It's a really good question, and I can only give you the best answer I have, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think people are only as objective with themselves, right? I can tell you that, like, it is the misfits who end up building.
Yeah.
And I was a very big misfit in 1920. I realized it.
Mm.
The war it didn't make sense to me.
Mm.
And so I was busy with myself, doing things, being curious, acquiring things, opening up my phone, putting it back together. Like, I was busy, like, tinkering with stuff because the world was not interesting to me. And I think this is a common trait amongst builders.
Yeah.
Why do you build? Because there's something about the world that doesn't make sense to you. You want to change it, you want to improve it, you're dissatisfied.
Yeah.
So I think the more you have that, dissatisfaction with the world, the more you want to build stuff. It's very, very natural.
Mm.
And people come at it from different perspectives. You may be a designer builder, you may be a coder builder, you may be an architect builder.
Yeah.
So I think it stems from some dissatisfaction with the world around you.
Got it.
And you can channel that into a builder mentality, right? And then if you're younger, you can accumulate all these tools that will help you build.
Sure.
And designing pixels and coding, these are tools to help you build.
Yeah.
I think it definitely came from that. Second is, I also used to be and can be a very lazy person.
Yeah.
So nothing really interested me until I started building those apps in 19. Then that was the only thing I wanted to do in my life, and everything else was secondary. So when something also pulls that side of you out, you have some respect for that process, for whatever that solution that thing is.
Very interesting. Very interesting. I think that's something to think about for anybody who ever wants to build a company. Sure. I think the second part was, what I observed when you were talking about the last phase of, how you made that pivot. It just felt like you were in a position where you had to take a lot of decisions very fast and efficiently. And that again feels like one of those trained muscle things that are easier said than done, right? And I'd love to understand how did you make some of those maybe hard decisions, right? Like letting go 300 people is no mean feat, right? It's not easy to make that decision, then execute on it. And to that point, right? So when you're making decisions and you have so many things to do, how do you maybe prioritize? And I don't mean this in a very, let's say, textbookish format, right? Since you went through this entire thing, what was it in the moment that you were doing that, okay, this is P1, P2, P3, I have to make this hard decision. Can I be objective and fast about it? It just feels like an uphill challenge.
Yeah, it definitely is. But in the pivot, it was no longer about growing the business. It was now about surviving.
And that forces you.
Oh, yeah. When your backs are pushed up against the wall, you need to make a decision. You need to make some big decisions.
Yeah.
And when it's about survival, human beings will do what needs to be done, right?
Yeah.
And the success of hike was very important to me. Very, very important. It was my past, like everything else. And I also knew, by the way, in a market like India, if hike failed, I would be in trouble. Because India is not like Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
So I had to make this work. And let's go figure out in the most respectful way possible what to do. And I think it was the best decision, not just for ourselves, but for actually everybody. We also sort of let go, kept, and so on and so forth, because we also realized we ended up hiring a lot of misfits in the company, And that was sort of our big learning from sort of that phase, right from the top to sort of the bottom, right?
Yeah.
But the other thing I think I picked up from there was that, and as you asked, it must be an uphill battle and so on. And I think in another way, you're probably asking, how did you build the confidence to make good decisions?
Yeah.
Right? That's a good question to ask. And if you talk to me, you know that you can't answer the question without further sort of breaking the question down, right? So if you're asking me how did you build the confidence, you have to ask, what is confidence?
What is it?
Right? And I think that confidence is a very poor substitute for clarity. And once you're clear, you're calm.
Yeah.
Everything's good. Confidence, people think, is beating your chest, this, that. Confidence is a very poor substitute for clarity. So the key was to become as clear as possible.
Which you achieved. And
But
then
this is the best path. There are all these possible paths, but this is the best path. And you've done, by the way, the second order thinking. And second order thinking is, if I make a decision now, what is the consequences 5 seconds from now, 5 minutes from now, 5 hours, some days from now, And you've considered all these 4, 5, 6 paths and done the second order thinking. And said, you know what, I'm clear. This is highest probability path. Let's go after it. Because the other paths are worse off. When you have that clarity, naturally you have a calm and confidence.
Yeah.
And then any uphill mountain becomes a flat plain.
Yeah.
Actually, it becomes the opposite. Now you can run and walk, very, very fast. And so, again, that's why I have a lot of value for like silence and thinking time. It's the other thing that, example, I learned, which is I'm a product obsessed founder. And that's a really good thing up until a certain point. Because in phase 1, you are the product builder. Yeah. You're doing everything. You're like the doer in chief. You're doing everything, building the product, HR, everything you're doing. At some point, you shift. And the company becomes about 150, 200 people. And now you need systems and processes, and you can't do everything. And I think, in 2016, 2017, 2018, I was still doing everything. That possibly also kind of burnt me out a little bit.
Yeah.
And I learned from that. And so phase 2 is sort of assembling a very, very strong team that you can rely on.
Yeah.
Right? And you may have already have that team, but how do you sort of build like the systems to rely on them and collectively like hold yourself accountable?
Yeah.
And if you're successful at doing that, suddenly you're not doing everything. As a matter of fact, you're doing nothing. And what's the success criteria for this? How do you measure this? I've debated on this so much with so many people. The success criteria of you successfully doing this transition is that the company's in great shape, it's growing, and about 60, 70% of your time is free. Your calendar is mostly empty. So you can think about things you want to. You can go talk to people you want to go talk to. You can explore your curiosity. And I consciously got there, a few years ago. And so that's also something to keep in mind. And again, that transition is tough because you identify yourself with the product builder.
Yeah. That's what I was wondering. Like, how do you separate yourself? It's so close to you.
It's actually my favorite question. So thank you for asking. So I was, very fortunate to stumble upon things along the last 7, 8, 10 years. The first one was, Zen Buddhism. It taught me about perspective. And I also was very curious, where do thoughts come from? Where did all this stuff come from? Why is like this thinking sitting in my head?
On Zen Buddhism itself, for those who may not be aware, are there any like crucial like core pointers or learnings that you've taken to life that you still practice?
Perspective. Perspective is everything. It's everything. So you might put a bar of chocolate here in front of 2 people, right? And if one person does not like chocolate and one person loves chocolate, they're going to see that bar of chocolate very differently. Perspective. There are 2 different versions of reality in one bar of chocolate. People don't think about this. Perspective is everything. And by the way, people don't shape their perspective. Their perspective is shaped by the world. So when I asked where do thoughts come from, I started to realize, oh my God, back when I was 24, 25, 70 to 80 to maybe 90% of my thinking is not my own. It's my conditioning. It's from my childhood. It's what I'm watching on TV. It's Hollywood, Bollywood, what people have said, what I've read. It's not my own. Oh my God, my perspective is not my own. And then you start to realize, what is my own? And what is this? And so that thing about perspective led me down this path to start spending time and figuring out what is mine and what is not. That's a tough thing to do. And the question is, how do you do that? So, and the timelines are plus minus 1 year, this, that, I don't remember because my memories, timeline is kind of fuzzy, but I remember the 2 things. I remember discovering my first ever Upanishad on YouTube, out of all the places.
Interesting.
And there's a lovely guru teacher called Swami Sarvapriyananda. who has a 2-part, 1.5 hours, 1.5 hours, 3 hours lecture on the Mandukya Upanishad that he's teaching in one of the IITs. It's a very old video. It's there.
Mm-hmm.
And this is my search for where the thoughts come from, what does it mean to be human, etc., etc. And I was down that sort of rabbit hole.
Mm-hmm.
And I stumbled upon this, and I didn't make much of it. I didn't know much about the ancient Indian scriptures, the Vedas, the Upanishads, the Gita. I knew nothing when I was, 25, 26.
Mm.
And I'd heard about it. My mom would read it, and I was like, what is this?
It doesn't feel important at the time.
Exactly. And I discovered it, and I watched it once. It made no sense to me, but something stuck. And I watched it twice, thrice, and I was like, oh my God. The Mandukya Upanishad talks about this fourth state called Turiya, which is what you are. And knowledge is great, but it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Mm-hmm. And I remember sitting in silence one day, and I had a very strange experience. I was sitting in silence one day and meditating or trying to meditate. Mm-hmm. And I ended up sitting for an hour. And this was a lot for me. Back then I was sitting for 10, 15 minutes, no more than that. That was a tough thing to do. And I sat for an hour, and I think I lost track of time. And I remember opening my eyes, and I felt like my body was completely numb. And I was like, my God, I've been sitting for a long time. My legs are all numb, this, that. And I'll sit for another 5, 10 minutes because the body will hopefully relax by then, and I can get up without sort of aches and pains. And when I, closed my eyes again about maybe 5, 10 minutes into it, my mind went blank, but something interesting happened. I realized my mind went blank. It was the strangest experience. If you don't have all the knowledge, it's a very strange experience. You were like, what is this? Well, who am I? Am I the mind, or am I this awareness? What is it? And now looking back, I can articulate that, this concept that we have of self-awareness is what? You have this notion of being aware of yourself. That's the Western way of thinking. The Indian, the Vedic way of thinking, which I really subscribe to now, is that, you're not we all assume we're human beings having a human experience. And we think that's it. You have this one life, then we're done. And some people think we're human beings having a spiritual experience. We're connected to God, religion, this, that, and so on and so forth. Well, then most people stop there. So did I once upon a time. And when we start going into all this knowledge, when you start picking up the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishad, the Vedanta, you start reading a little bit of the Vedas, you start to realize or question, wait, hold on. Is it that we're a human being having a spiritual experience? Or you are a spiritual being incarnating into human form, having a human experience? And humor me for 5 minutes. Let's just go down this rabbit hole, right? If you're a human being incarnating into human form, having a human experience, then you're not the human form.
Spiritual form.
You are something that's come here into the human form. You're not the human form. And the human form is, in simple terms, the body and mind. So you are not your mind and body. You have a mind and body. And suddenly, if you sit with this knowledge, acquire it, reflect on it, and sit in meditation in silence, you start to realize, oh my God, I am not the mind, I'm not the body. I have a mind. I have a body. And what that does is it changes the relationship you have with yourself.
Yeah.
And so you ask me, how do you separate these things? You separate them by realizing you are not the mind. You have a mind. And your mind is like a toolkit you can use to make your way in this life.
Yeah.
The body is also a tool you can use to make your way in this life. And if it's a tool can be improved.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, you have a desire to improve the tool.
Yeah.
Both the mind and the body. They talk about the mind, body, intellect. 3 things, right? So if you have a mind, you can distance yourself from it and say, okay, what needs fixing? These things are great, but what about all this stuff?
Yeah.
And then this changes your relationship with yourself and changes your relationship with the world. And then what happens is, oh, okay, if you get offended, you're not offended. Your mind is offended.
As folks who are driven by the world of capitalism and folks who have more important immediate problems to solve for, let's say food, jobs, money, day-to-day family, friends, whatnot, right? It just feels like this self-discovery process is one that requires time and effort before you start seeing results. I'm sure once you see the results, you believe in it, you subscribe to it because it transforms a lot of what you do. But that journey where it's uncomfortable, where it feels like, can I spend my time better someplace else where I can see the tangible results, the more life form results in a more tangible manner? How do you make that trade-off? Because I, as I was listening to you, right, I was wondering that there will definitely be a set of people thinking that, will I have the luxury, and I'm trying to be extreme here, to actually spend time thinking about these things and sorting myself out, not being able to see the benefits of it?
It's such a great question. I think one is, I think we today unfortunately live in a world where time can be easily spent in activities that are, let's say, non-productive.
Yeah.
I have that in my life too. Everybody has it, right? And so if you really care, can you find half an hour a day, 15 minutes a day? This is not one of those things where you spend 6 months in an ashram, you come out sort of change. You could do it, but that's a luxury most people don't have.
Yeah.
But can you incorporate some new habit into your life? It's very small, that puts you on a path
to eventual discovery.
You may have something, right? But also detach yourself from the silver and gold. I think we definitely, as a society, we have time. We have to make the time, right? The question is, though, why would you make the time?
Yeah.
As you mentioned, human beings are very goal-oriented. You need something out of this, right? And, very quickly, by the way, after going down this path, your mind shifts. Very quickly. The challenge is keeping that perspective. When you walk in, all of this makes sense to you, and your mind shifts. And you're like, I'm done, I'm enlightened, great. And then you start living modern life, and modern life will push you back.
Yeah, the resistance is so high.
And your old habits and patterns and so on and so forth. So you have to have a consistent, practice in your life to sort of, sit above all these things.
Yeah.
But I think it honestly comes down to how badly do you want it? If you were to ask me, Kavin, what's the one thing that you think has got you where you are? It's just, I wanted it so bad. We were obsessed and we were possessed to make sure that we got to where we needed to get to. And we did anything possible. And I say we because this is a company. It's
collective effort.
It's a very strong team. And I was possessed and I was obsessed. And I still am, by the way.
Yeah.
And what I realized is, if you figure out the inputs, if you solve for the inputs, the outputs take care of themselves.
Absolutely.
And this is true for a business, by the way. So a lot of our time is spent on discussing the inputs and not the outputs. But it's true for a human being too.
Absolutely.
You have to spend time on your inputs.
Yeah.
What are your inputs? Your mind, your body. How do you think? How does body act? Where do your thoughts come from? Who are you? If you spend time on the inputs, the outputs actually do take care of themselves.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I picked up and learned from the ancient sort of texts, there are 4 Mahabhakyas in the Vedas, big grand sort of statements, right? And the second one is Tattvamasi, which means that you are. Nature, the universe, life, effectively, we're simply 7 trillion atoms of carbon and hydrogen and God knows what. We are literally made up of the same stuff.
Yeah.
So then I start to look to nature. And when you observe nature very closely, you pick up certain things.
Yeah.
For example, a rose, beautiful rose starts off as a seed.
Yeah.
And when you plant a seed in the ground, the seed is very small, but you don't judge it. You don't call it very small.
Yeah.
You understand it's a seed. You nourish it. You give it the water and so on and so forth and let it grow.
Yeah.
At some point, the seed will sprout
Yeah.
Again, you don't go and say, bad. You understand it's in a certain journey.
You give it time.
You give it time, you're patient, you nourish it.
Yeah.
And ultimately that sort of sprouting becomes a rose. Now, in the seed, there's always the whole potential of the rose. And when you're observing it at any given time, it's in a process of change.
Yeah.
But the rose is always there.
Yeah.
And this is how nature works. So if we are part of it, it's kind of sort of how we work too.
Yeah.
So when you observe nature, like there's so many lessons because we are it.
Yeah.
And so the more you spend time on these things, and if you have a curiosity, the more you'll pick up. And ultimately for what? Ultimately, as a founder and CEO of the company, I'm also like trying to be the best version of me.
Yeah.
Because our culture is one of respect.
Yeah.
Our culture is one of like creativity, and it needs the best version of me.
Yeah.
And so you have to be spending time figuring out what does it mean to be the best version of Kavin.
Yeah. I love that.
And that could be different now to like 2 years from now.
Sure.
That could be different from phase to phase.
Yeah. But you have to work upon it. You have to work on the inputs.
The inputs. One of them being, don't identify yourself too much with things that are going to hold you back.
Yeah.
And the way to do that is to have this larger perspective of who you might be. That you have a mind and you can work on it and improve it and so on and so forth. So that's had a humongous impact on my life. As a matter of fact, like someone asked me, God, if you were not building hype, what would you do? And I was like, I'll be a full-time yogi.
That's lovely.
Yeah.
No, but I think this is amazing. I don't have these conversations often on the podcast, but it goes to show that, you have to find ways that can actually improve what you're trying to achieve. And there are human aspects to building companies, to having outlier lives, returns, institutions, and the inputs to them have to be dealt with a lot of proactiveness, intention, ownership. And I love that. I think this is very, very, very helpful. I have to ask one thing before we maybe, let's say, change direction and go to, let's say maybe a bit of the gaming insights. I'd love to understand your product, gaming insights. Those are phenomenal. And it just feels like you know how to build things that just like scale super well. So I want to like understand that mindset. But before we get there, it just feels like you're one of those, and this is not to in any way appease you, but it feels like you have a lot of multidisciplinary thoughts, which are well thought through. And that also is not commonplace, perhaps, in an ecosystem where we're seeing a lot of first-time founders, where a lot of people are just, for the lack of better words or phrasing, perhaps figuring things out as they happen, right? We're seeing a lot of first-time new companies being built at scale, which means you have a lot of these new problems to your business first, which don't give you the time to perhaps delve into other things, right?
Yeah.
However, with this conversation, it's evident, and in my research also, it was evident that you have an opinion on multiple things and a well thought through opinion. I'd love to understand the curiosity behind doing so, and B, how does that then help you correlate to what you do on the business, which may be, let's say, specific, but how do things from different disciplines come in and play a factor there?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that anyone who's building a company, and this is probably true for anybody, but specifically if you're a founder CEO and a young founder CEO, coming back to that idea of like your belief in yourself and your trust in yourself will come from the ability to figure things out. Mm-hmm. So there's some part of you that should be dedicated towards figuring things out. Mm-hmm. And that's not necessarily running the business.
Sure.
And building products. It's a parallel track. You have to dedicate time towards consuming knowledge, information, meeting the right people, bringing the right advisors on board and so on and so forth to sort of equip you to sort of figure things out. So you can go build the company, go build the products and so on and so forth. This aspect has to be there. For a lot of founders, subconsciously, it is there because they're curious, they read. For many people, it's the opposite. They don't realize that when you start a new journey, you don't know much.
Yeah.
So you have to build the muscle to figure things out.
Yeah.
That's very, very important. Everybody has their own approach.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of mine was like, go find the content. Go find the people. Very fortunately as well, I discovered things like Zen Buddhism, all the sort of the knowledge that helped me tremendously in my journey, to sort of develop into who I am today and continue to develop. You need to have some part of your life dedicated towards figuring things out and being the best version of you. You need that. If you don't have that, you're going to struggle. You may end up still getting what you want. It's going to be significantly more painful.
Sure.
And I think that today, in today's ecosystem, nobody talks about that, because I don't think we've had a lot of people go through a company building journey. I guarantee you, if you talk to like a Binny or a Sachin or one of these guys who built through, they'll have a very similar conversation in different ways, in their own ways too.
Yeah. Well, very few people have seen this journey for more than 10 years in India.
And also built scale and, built companies and so on and so forth and raised a lot of capital. But, the advice is you have to spend time on yourself and figuring things out. Very, very important, and staying one step ahead of the curve. Or, you can do it other ways. You can actually hire a CEO and have them run the company, and you focus on product and so on and so forth. So it really depends on what you want to go through. Regardless, you got to figure out what you're good at. And that itself takes some time.
Yeah.
And also, like, we have a lot of, venture capital investors who are not company builders. I think 99.9% of Indian investors are not company builders.
Yeah.
As a result of which, the advice that are being given to the founders are not necessarily company building. They're more like, maybe market-oriented business and so on and so forth. So the development curve is very, very different.
Yeah.
And so I think that's definitely one thing. What was your second question?
It was mostly around the fact that, how do you ensure multidisciplinary, and then how does that relate back to the business? But I think you answered both. And
if you take care of your inputs,
then the output, it relates back to the business.
It does. And, funnily enough, as human beings, we have this need, and rightfully so, to segregate the world into all these buckets.
Yeah.
There is physics, there is chemistry, there is mathematics, there is business, there is entrepreneurship. We segregate.
Yeah, but that's not the case.
As a human being, you are physics, you are chemistry, you are biology, you are everything.
Yeah.
So multidisciplinary is you.
Yeah. No,
so
that's very true.
Exploring those aspects of life and you are very important to figure out sort of how to do the best you can in running a business. And by the way, I'm also very idealistic, right? Which is probably what drives some of this stuff, right? Yeah. If I do something, I want to do to the best of my abilities. I want to build an environment that is the best, right?
Yeah.
Have the best impact in the world. And if you want to have the best impact in the world, you kind of have to understand the world a little bit.
Yeah.
And the world is not single discipline. It's kind of, multidiscipline.
Yeah.
The systems we built today, if you were to ask me, Kavin, what are you really most proud about?
Mm-hmm.
The systems we have today are incredible. And that's the one big learning the last 4 or 5 years. Going from phase 1 to phase 2, doer in chief to the company builder in chief. I ended up realizing, my God, the ultimate product that I'm building is the company itself. The company is the product, and company has certain features. They can evolve. This is how we build the company today, by the systems, right?
Yeah.
And I ended up developing a framework, my own, to sort of build the company, because again, there is such limited information, by the way, in how you scale a company.
I agree.
Not just in India, but globally too.
Yeah.
And so we've also gone through a lot of trial and
error. Yeah, hits and misses.
And fortunately stumbled across people who helped us along the way to sort of give us the start and the input to sort of figure out our own version of what it means to build a company.
Yeah.
So if you come work at Hike, we've done things our own way.
Yeah.
And, a small example of what we do is our weekly business reviews are very different to a typical meeting. These teams will create a document that can be as long as 6-7 pages. And there are 8-9 questions that are given to the teams that have to fill out every week. And a bunch of us will come into a virtual, Google Meet call. And for the first 10 minutes, we're just reading the document and commenting.
Okay.
And when that's over, comments will be discussed. And then we have observers sitting in the meeting, and they'll ask questions, and the meeting gets closed. Now, why have we done this? It's because I'm trying to push the mind to be clear. If my team's minds are clear and I can see it, we're in a good place.
Yeah.
We'll make the right decisions for the customers, for the business, and so on and so forth. But, for example, most companies don't operate like this.
Yeah.
We found our own sort of way to it. And there's a lot more.
We can discuss, but that's lovely. I think, the writing culture I think Shane Parrish has this quote which says that, hey, writing gives poor thinking nowhere to hide.
Yeah.
And I think that's just magical. And a lot of those cues, I think, in a brief way, I also, my brief learning from the podcast has been that very often now I find myself consuming non-entrepreneurial, non-business content, because that helps me correlate things better for these conversations. And you have to have some of those non-specific research, content, consumption, so that you can extrapolate things, you can connect the dots.
And
exactly. Bring it. I think that's also an acquired muscle over a period of time, but that's lovely and very worth mentioning.
What you've also seen is like at some point you hit a ceiling here.
Yeah, precisely.
And it's like, where do you go? Well, you have to go here.
Yeah, so, I agree.
Yeah.
But no, lovely. This has been really, really fascinating. Towards the end, let's maybe uncover a couple of these aspects around the newer business model.
Sure.
Now, again, it feels like hitting escape velocity. A lot's changing every 6 months. There's still a lot of unknowns, but now you have certainty. I'd love to understand some of these guardrails that you've perhaps established in this version, right? One of the things that you've been vocal about is the definitive business model, the definitive truths that you know will continuously stay. What are other things that you feel are certain, perhaps not values, but objective things that, you know, there is alignment on from a team perspective, and everybody agrees to, and where does that lead? And then maybe we'll discuss a couple of
it's such a good question. So, to answer that question, I had to sort of dig deep a little bit and build a framework.
Sure.
And I like building frameworks because it's how I make sense of things to myself. And then also you can explain those things to people very easily.
Yeah.
So I have a framework on sort of how I run the company. You know, it's vision, principles, people, product, process, communication, capital, and in the last 18 months, we've added regulation. So vision, principles, people, product, process, communication, capital, regulation.
Yeah.
Now, my mind has to be touching all these things at a certain period of time.
Yeah.
And everybody is involved in one of these.
Mm-hmm.
So, the vision is, first of all, what's your purpose? Why do you guys exist?
Mm-hmm.
It's that North Star that you never achieve that's going to be a driving factor that you have that we articulate and explain to the company. And we put it out there for everyone to see because we tell people, if your purpose is this, you will succeed here. Mm-hmm. If it's not this, you're going to have a problem in this company. And I think Warren Buffett had a fantastic quote, which was, you can hold a rock concert and that can be successful. You can also hold a ballet and that can be successful.
Mm-hmm.
Just don't hold a rock concert and advertise it like a ballet.
Yeah.
Be clear about who you are and let people self-select in, self-select out.
Sure.
And I think that starts with why do we exist?
Mm.
And that's one very important part of the vision structure that we have. The second is, what's the 5-year dream state?
Mm-hmm.
If, do we have a 5-year vision of what we want to go build?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the mission, which is the immediate next milestone. It's the mountain we're climbing now. We may have 5 mountains to climb, but the peak we're climbing now is the mission. So this is the vision. You have the purpose, the 5-year blueprint, and the mission. Mm-hmm. And this has to be clear to everybody inside the company. And then we have principles. And principles is principles and culture. Mm-hmm. And culture effectively is, and it's a word that's thrown around a lot.
Yeah.
Right? So if you were to ask, what is culture? Culture to me is like, what's the environment? What's the vibe? Right? Like, what kind of meetings are you having?
Yeah.
How are people conducting themselves with one another?
Yeah.
How are you making decisions? What do you build new things? Are you comfortable with failure? What's our take on failure? It's all of these things, our values and how we sort of do things. And we have something called the high code, which we've had since the beginning, but now we're on version 5. Even the principles have evolved as we've grown up and evolved as well.
Yeah.
And it's the spine of the company. And like, for example, one of the values, the 9 values of the high code is be an owner, not a renter. And we are very picky about this because, if you're a renter in an apartment and something's broken, you're not going to care. You're going to call your landlord and say, yaar, theek kar do, please.
Yeah.
But if you own the apartment, it's your problem.
Yeah.
So, and we really, push heavily on this. Another one we have is, be curious and keep improving. Because You want to launch things. Something is, at some point, it's not going to work. But be curious, keep improving, keep improving. Another one is build and make magic. We have 9 of these values that form the spine of sort of, the culture. Based on these values and the vision, the purpose, the mission, we go bring people. We hire the right people inside the company, and the people inside the company, feedback is given on sort of all these principles. But inside the people piece, there is something we call the people funnel. And because I'm very, product oriented, everything in my mind is like a funnel in a product, right? So the people funnel is effectively like a product funnel. So there is, employer branding. There is talent acquisition. There is onboarding. There is employee retention and engagement. There's employees that are referring. There's employee churn, right? And it's like a product funnel. Acquisition, awareness, acquisition, activation, onboarding, engagement, referrals is a big one. The product has, product, growth, distribution, and business. And so what's the product strategy? What's the distribution strategy? Like, what are the unit economics like? And so on and so forth. And we have a whole, set of thinking on, what are the DHMs, we call it, the delightful, hard to copy and margin enhancing things that we're building in the market. And so this one is a big meaty piece. And then we have process. And processes, can we build enough systems to streamline all of the above and hold ourselves collectively accountable? I think this was the biggest breakthrough we made in the last 3-4 years. So we have this system called, we don't have a better name for it, but it's called the 26-13-6-4-2-1 system. And these all stand for weeks. So 26 weeks, 13 weeks, 6 weeks. The 26 is 6 months, 13 weeks is 3 months. And the way to make sense of this is every one of these vision, principles, people, product, process, is touched in some different way across all of these 26, 13, 6, 41. So let's break it down, for example. For the vision, do we have to do something on a weekly basis? Not really, right? You define the vision, it's good for a while.
Sure.
What about on a 2-week basis? No, not really. What about on a 4-week basis? Maybe, yeah. To remind the team. Connect everything we're doing to the vision.
Maybe there's feedback.
There's feedback, right? And every 6 months, the mission gets updated.
Wow.
26 weeks, because the next set of goals have to come.
Yeah.
What about principles? Or let's take the people aspect, actually. Right? Across the people funnel, what has to be done on a 1-week basis, 2-week basis, 4, 6, 13, 26?
Wow.
On the product side, right? This is the one that I think we've done the best at, which is we have a 26 weeks performance cadence. We set our goals for 26 weeks. The mountain we climb is a 6-month mountain.
Nice.
So we have a North Star metric, which sort of, breaks into proxy metrics, themes, and so on and so forth, that we use to, keep ourselves accountable. And then the planning that we just came out of is we call it a planning in retros. So for the first 3 days of planning, every team has created a document called a retrospective.
For the past quarter,
past 6
weeks.
months, right? Yeah. And what have you accomplished? You set out to do this. What happened? What went well? What didn't go well on the product side, on the execution side? And there's a section saying, okay, fine. If you had all the resources you wanted, what would you do in the next 6 months? And that sets us up for a nice planning. And then we have the planning meeting, we, set the new metrics and so on and so forth. And then what we do is every 13 weeks, we have a similar system, but smaller. Are we on track for our 26 weeks goals? And then inside 13 weeks, every 6 weeks, we have a mid-quarter checkpoint. Are we on track for the 13-week goals? It's much more lightweight. So the system is big, smaller, and smaller. And then on a 4 to 6 week basis, we do a town hall. So we're communicating to our company everything. Successes, failures, metrics, this, that, so on and so forth. On a 2-week basis, we sprint. And a weekly, we have our weekly business reviews. The whole system is just designed and it works like a machine.
Amazing.
And then, below process, you have communication. So we ask the same question. What communication do we got to do on a weekly basis, 2-weekly basis, 4, 6, and based on this, we have ideas. So, okay, our all hands happen every 4 weeks.
Nice.
We have a Q&A that happens every 2 weeks. Weekly business reviews are published to the entire company. They're also a way to communicate, we realized. So we're also learning as we sort of go along. And then we have capital, which is capital raising and allocation. Again, can be distributed across this. And the last thing is regulation, which is a 24/7.
Yeah.
So vision, principles, people, product,
Wow,
process,
that's incredibly comprehensive.
communication,
it.
capital, regulation, 26 all the way to 1, and you can just mix and match.
Yeah.
And this, by the way, holds all of us accountable. We have nowhere to hide.
Yeah.
And then what you can do is be part of the machine and go play your role, because everybody also plays a different role inside this machine.
Yeah.
And, fortunately, a company ultimately people think is the strategy, is the business, it's the product. And no, the company ultimately is the team you hire.
Yeah.
And all of this has been built with my team. And so it's like a process and system we built together. And you also have a culture of people who are open to transparency, right? I think the best talent wants transparency.
Yeah.
You have to have a set of people who are open to being held accountable.
Yeah.
You'll be surprised at how sometimes it's very difficult to find people who are radically responsible and accountable.
I'm sure.
So our system forces all these things. And I think this is also why we made so much progress so fast in the second leg of sort of building in a rush that we're going to dive into now.
Yeah. That's lovely. I think that's one of the most comprehensive things I've heard on company building. And this is inclusive of research and, just like understanding content and reading upon it. So this is lovely. I think this is very, very, very helpful. No, but I think that, as I was mentioning, I think that framework is really, really helpful. Going forward, I think one of the things that stands out is, gaming is this piece which everybody's talking about in India, but it feels like we're yet to have that moment, right, in India where it just like blows in some shape and form. You're, of course, more on ground on this. And considering that we started off, my first question was also foresight, right? You've seen these tech moments. Where in the gaming ecosystem do you think where we are as an ecosystem, and where do you think this is headed, considering there are elements of, Web3 involved with what you're doing as well? Where do you think this is headed? What is the state where we are? That'll be really nice to hear, Kavin.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, gaming itself has multiple subsectors. There's the casual gaming market, the mid-core, the hardcore, and inside mobile gaming itself. And, in India today, a lot of people play games. I think 500 million games in the country that do like an hour of gaming on their phones every day.
Yeah.
It's a lot. And there's probably about like maybe 15, 20 million people that play, or, 30, 40 million people that play like these mid-core, hardcore games like a Free Fire, PUBG, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And the business model for these guys is, of course, in-app sort of virtual goods where people can buy stuff. But in India, people, the purchasing number of people are very, very small. But there's also ads and so on and so forth. And, that's today what the business model for gaming is, which is regardless of mid-core, hardcore, casual, there's this in-app sort of virtual goods sort of model that people, build and how they build a business around that. Our approach is a little different. Our approach was like, what is something big we can attach ourselves to? Like a bigger mission. Like in Hike Messenger, we had like Bring India Online, dramatically. This was, gaming was big. In India, like 95% of people still earn less than $300 a month. And payments have become seamless. So could we somehow convert gaming into a new source of economic opportunity?
Yeah.
With that free time you spend like an hour or two every day, could you convert that into some value?
Yeah.
And so we wanted to build what we call a free-to-play, win-to-earn platform, where you could come on this platform, play for free, compete against one another in these big sort of tournaments and prize pools, and the top person gets like the big prize, which is actually real, cash and money. And you could then also pay to participate in bigger winning tournaments if you feel like you have the skills to go up against the best people. This is the Rush Gaming universe. And for the first 38 months, we've sort of built out the platform to 16 casual games and one mobile application, but it's been built on the current infrastructure today. UPI, Web2, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And the reason we've done that is because, that's where the customer base is today. Everybody today is in this realm.
Absolutely.
Today. There is an additional big idea attached to this vision, which is, could we also build our platforms in a way where customers become owners of the very platforms they help create and thus participate in the economic upside as the platform grows in value.
Yeah. The virtual state, the virtual.
Yeah. And I've been thinking about this a lot. And this is the whole Web3 blockchain sort of piece of it. Because blockchain effectively is a database that allows you to own things online.
Yeah.
And ownership is how you create value and wealth for like people. And, our platform doesn't exist without our people. If you were to ask me, Kavin, what does Rush sell? And my answer is we sell nothing.
Yeah.
We give people a platform to go compete against one another and we just take a small fee to connect. We sell nothing. If you don't come and play on our platform, we have no value.
Yeah.
So our value is actually in the usage, in the platform. And so people should be rewarded for that sort of value.
Yeah.
And we've not been able to get to that because there's uncertainty on regulations and so on and so forth in Web3 inside of India. And, we're sort of engaged in these discussions. But today, the platform is a free-to-play win-to-earn sort of platform where people can also deposit real money and play in sort of these big tournaments.
And the analogy that's the passport for their citizens in a virtual world stands for those folks.
Absolutely. So as a free user, you can play in the platform and earn and win, but you're a tourist. So the platform is slightly restricted.
Yeah.
If you deposit money in the platform, you kind of get a passport and the whole
it opens up.
And so today, the experience is focused heavily on the paid customer.
Yeah.
However, to bring this vision to life, we also have to have a forever free user experience.
Absolutely.
Today, when you're a free user, if you don't convert, after some point, you can't play in the platform. Because the incentives we're giving you to sort of play in the platform is for you to sort of convert and deposit money. But could we build a forever free user experience where you may not have the desire to deposit,
but you can still leverage it.
And you can still play in the platform forever and use your time and skills and energy to compete in battle and win tournaments and earn.
That's lovely.
That's the only way you'll build 100 million user platform.
Yeah.
And that's the only way you'll have a massive impact.
Yeah.
So to build 100 million user platform in a free-to-play, win-to-earn, pay-to-participate in bigger winnings platform, you need to focus on a forever free user experience.
Yeah.
And we do casual gaming. We don't do all the other stuff. We do casual gaming. The awesome thing about casual gaming is a big scale market.
Yeah.
It's a low ARPU, but big scale market, which is why we can think like this.
Yeah.
Also, the more free people who are forever on the platform, the stronger the network.
Sure.
And ultimately, if you can find ways to get these people to become owners in the very platforms they help create, and let's say, 10% of the platform is owned by customers. If this platform could one day, let's say in 5, 7, 10 years, become a $10 billion platform, customers own $1 billion worth of their value.
That's huge.
Which is massive.
Massive.
And take that one level out further, right? Imagine, the government suddenly said, we understand this technology. We understand what you're trying to do. And what if we mandated or recommended that every tech company in the country
should have a certain portion.
Allocates 5-10% of the value to customers.
Yeah.
And let's say 5-7 years from now, the Indian online economy becomes worth $1 trillion.
Yeah.
Just imagine if 10% of that was owned by
$100 billion.
$100 billion in the hands of customers would move this country forward 50 years.
Absolutely.
In a matter of 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
And so this is the discussion we're trying to have, which is, the blockchain may have all these speculative things that are going on in the world, but there is value for this technology. And this version of capitalism, I call it inclusive capitalism. And by the way, nothing wrong with building a business.
Absolutely.
Nothing wrong with building a massive business and, having a capitalistic approach to sort of, making money, gathering resources and so on and so forth. But India needs potentially in the future also a slightly more inclusive version of it.
Absolutely.
And if you can do it this way, you can build your fantastic businesses on the backs of customers who also benefit.
Yeah. I love
Wouldn't that be amazing, right?
Yeah.
If
That's
we can bring it to life.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be amazing?
I'm sure, and kudos to the effort that the team is putting in and the audacious vision. I think that's the best part about what you've done over the years. Keep an audacious vision, build a great team and show momentum on that front. But I absolutely love that. And I, in my research, the recent, coincidentally here itself, the interview you had with Pratham, you speak in more depth about the model, and that was really fascinating to hear. So thanks again for sharing. And I'm sure that this will I think going back to your point about what are things that will happen, it feels like this is one of the things that should definitely happen in a decentralized world. It's just about timing. Let's see how it pans out.
We're committing to it. Let's see where it goes.
Yeah, no, that's lovely to hear. I think we've covered a lot of ground today. I'm genuinely mentioning the kind of perspective expansion I've had has been incredible today. Where I want to end the conversation, Kavin, is again on the softer side. I think we maybe didn't get a lot of chance to talk about the foundational insights you have on why founders do what they do. But I've had the pleasure of observing again with research that, you talk about passion, resilience, and having that strong foundation to why you want to build a company. The reason we do this podcast is to humanize the entrepreneurial journey, not just while we are talking to survivors, people who have been able to build successful companies. We want to also humanize the effort and prepare almost or share insights in the reality sense of it to future founders. So if you could perhaps speak to them as we conclude as to what makes this journey fulfilling, what makes it worthwhile, and what you would like to tell somebody who's thinking of ever building their own institution. I would love that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, first of all, I believe building a company is a character building journey disguised as a business venture. Oh my God.
Wow.
I think I'd be a very different person if I was not building this company. And I love that, right? Because it's not just building a company, but it's also growing as a person and evolving yourself and evolving your consciousness to become a better person. And so as a result, you can serve the needs of, let's say, your fellow people better.
Yeah.
And if there's a set of things I would focus on sort of learning and figuring out, it's resilience, it's adaptive thinking, it's creative thinking, it's all these things that you might think are softer skills, but are the inputs to the outputs of you doing what else.
Yeah.
Because the world will never work the way you want it to.
Yeah.
It just never will. Even if you sit alone in a room, there's bound to be some mosquito that comes and starts bothering you.
Yeah.
So the world will never work the way you want. As a result, you have to get very good at observing the world the way it is and figuring out how do you work around and adapt and then change.
Yeah.
And it's a very, very important part of the founder's journey.
Yeah.
Because you are trying to cause change. If you're building a company, you're trying to put something out there that does not exist today. There's also some divine aspect to this, by the way. I tell my team, we're creating something out of nothing.
Yeah.
When you're doing that, first of all, be grateful for that potential to sort of bring magic into the world. And second is, if you're building something out of nothing, you're going to go up against some resistance.
Yeah.
So there's naturally going to be people that resist against. And you need to be able to go deal with all that stuff. Very, very important. Why to start a company? My recommendation is don't.
Why?
And the reason I say don't is because building a company is a very, very hard thing to do.
Yeah.
Being an entrepreneur is a very, 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 very hard thing to do. So if you want to be an entrepreneur for the sake of being an entrepreneur because it's cool, you get some status out of it and so on and so forth, don't do it. Do it if you find something that you're absolutely obsessed with. That you're thinking about when you're going to sleep, that you're thinking about in the shower, that you're in a daze about. If you're obsessed about an idea that you should bring to life or some idea how to move an industry forward, and you're really obsessed with it, and obsessed with building whatever it is and figuring this out, then go do it. Because there was a quote by the Mark and recent Elon Musk, that talked about, he said, building a company is waking up in the morning and chewing broken glass every day.
Yeah.
And learning to love it. And, while that's a very exaggerated version of it, a lot of days are like that.
Yeah.
Because you're just solving problems. And if you don't have the growth and the, team, building a company is so multifaceted.
Yeah.
So multifaceted. It is a 360-degree experience.
Yeah.
And if you are truly, by the way, a spiritual being incarnating into human form, having a human experience, building a company is one of those things that's the best thing to pick up if you really want to grow 360 in a record amount of time.
That's lovely.
So keep that in mind as you sort of
Wow.
go on this journey. But don't forget that also along the way, you'll have to find people
Yeah.
who not only support your vision but support you as a person, who understand like your personality quirks. Everybody has them. It sort of works around them and supports them. And ultimately, for me, one of the key things to do was to build an environment where I could succeed myself.
Yeah.
I think also one of the reasons entrepreneurs found companies is not because there are some problems they want to go solve for, but they aren't fitting anywhere.
Yeah.
And so you want to build an environment where you could succeed.
There you thrive.
You could thrive.
Yeah.
And as a result of which, Hike is that environment where like it's built so that I can thrive.
Yeah.
And as a result, people who are similar in some ways can also thrive
Together. Yeah. That's lovely. I think I couldn't have asked for a better conclusion. There are so many things that you've said there that hold more gravitas than just listening to. So I think it requires a lot of reflection and real absorption. But I have to thank you. I have to thank you for being so kind, candid, and very, very open to sharing the genuine learnings that you've had over the years. And we're very glad for the work you're doing. It just feels incredible. And this was a really, really in-depth conversation that I'm going to cherish for a while. Thank you so much, Kavin, for being on the podcast.
Yeah, Jivraj, thank you so much for having me. Honestly, I think both of us didn't know the conversation would go in this direction, but it's been fantastic. I've had such a fantastic time.
I'm so glad.
Thank you so much.
So glad. Thank you so much.
Right.
Hello. If you made it this far, you've probably watched the entire episode. And if you've done that, I'm really grateful. I and my team try to put in a lot of effort to ensure that we can bring the best quality content to you. So if you liked the episode, if you watched it thus far, my request to you is to share it with people, to subscribe to the channel, and to ensure that we can keep growing. We are everything and anything only because of you, our listeners. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll keep bringing to you amazing content. Cheers.